Hey guys, I'm Nashpa. Welcome back to my channel. And today I'm being joined by, not welcomed by, Pao from the channel Super Pao. And I don't know if you prefer to be called Pao or Paolina, but this video is going to be a lot of like chaos, and in that it's going to be a lot of fun. So I let Pao introduce herself because this is going to go on both our channels. So if you don't know me, hi, welcome. And now it's Pao's turn to say nice things about herself.
Hi, I'm Pao, and that's short for Paolina. And it's just a nickname. Pao's just a nickname because a lot of people seem to have trouble with the name Paolina. Uh, but I like the punch that Pao has. It's nice and snappy. Yeah, my channel is Super Pao, where I review books poorly.
That's something we have in common then.
We just like to talk about books, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the quality.
Yeah, and then sometimes like I blame the fact that I English is not my first language. So anytime I don't make sense, I'm like, I'm just gonna make that excuse and hope for the best.
English is my first and only language, so I don't have that excuse. My excuse is that communication is hard.
Yeah, and I think our skills have become somewhat less refined, being trapped in our houses for the last 4 months, I'd say. So today we are here to talk about The Bride by Bapsi Sidhwa. I think it's not in the frame, so The Bride by Bapsi Sidhwa. And it's also called the Pakistani Bride in a lot of other places. For example, in the US, because I think The Bride was a little too generic, and because the author is Pakistani, the publisher probably thought that if we add the word Pakistani, that'll just tell the people where the bride is from. So we read this book together, and we read it with another subscriber of mine. And I feel like I had a lot of fun reading this book. This is my fifth Bapsi Sidhwa book. I'm trying to go through all of her books, and I have one left. And I have this sense of anxiety that I don't want them to end, but like eventually all good things do come to an end. And let me just give a brief synopsis for those of you who are not familiar with this book, because I feel like if you are from Pakistan, then you've heard of Bapsi Sidhwa's name in passing. Maybe you haven't picked up one of her books. But this book is basically about this man called Qasim. And Qasim is from the northern areas of Pakistan, so which are very nice to look at. They're very beautiful. They're the coldest region in our country. They're constantly, people travel there all the time. And the cultures and traditions are very different from the rest of the country. And Qasim, being a mountain man from the region, he comes across a girl in Punjab where the partition riots were taking place, and he comes across this orphan girl and he decides to adopt her. So we have this setting of this man who is from a completely different culture raising a girl in the heart of Pakistan, which is the city of Lahore. So that's basically how the story starts, with him adopting this girl, and it's set against the backdrop of the partition. For those of you who are not familiar with the synopsis of the book, I thought that I'd mention that. So, Pao, how did you find the experience of reading this book?
I had a really, really positive experience reading this book, and I think a lot of that had to do with, I mean, not only the quality of the book, but also the buddy reading experience, because this was the first successful buddy read that I've had. And reading it together with you two made me slow down and really think about what I was reading, because usually I just read for plot. I just want to know what happens in like every book that I read. So it made me slow down and really think about what I was reading, and it made me feel like I was back in my literature classes in a good way, because I prepared thoughts to talk about with people, and it was just a very positive experience. And I also really enjoyed the book because I had never read a Bapsi Sidhwa book before, and I hadn't heard of her before you started talking about her. So your praise and your reviews of her books made me want to read them. So I was glad that you invited me to this buddy read. It was a great experience. I loved it.
So, about the themes, what did you think about the themes of the book?
I got a lot out of it. Like the themes that I wrote down in my notes are like showing tradition up against progress, and like progress for good or bad, and tradition for good or bad. And I liked how the author didn't really tell us what was like right and wrong. She just sort of like let us come to our own conclusions. And then we have how women are treated in society, and not just the culture in the book, but like multiple societies, because we do have an American woman character in there, and she's used as an example and like a contrast. And then just how people, like individuals, survive in like rapidly changing countries and rapidly changing political systems. Like, what does an individual do when like their country is like completely changed, out of their control?
You want to tell us the alternate title that you thought of for this book? Because the Pakistani Bride wasn't enough, and at some point, I think you suggested that it should be called something else.
Yeah, because we don't get to the bride part until over halfway through the book, so we don't get to like the marriage and like the bride part till later. So I thought we call it The Bride because that's a simpler title than a handful of people trying to figure out how to live in a rapidly changing country.
A little wordy, I would say.
Yeah, wouldn't fit on the cover very well.
Yeah, that's true. So I thought like one of the biggest themes in this book that I picked up was honor. The idea of women, if you do something that you want to do, it's somehow challenging the man's honor. And honor, it's been such a long conversation in our country about this idea of women defying honor just because they want to marry who they want, or they run away, or they do something that somehow offends the male society, or just doesn't really agree with their ideas. So I thought the concept of honor was really explored in this book, because we have Qasim, the main character, whose whole idea around respect around women is the fact that his honor is unsullied, and he needs to feel to protect. He feels the need to protect his honor, and I think that was something that we explored throughout this book. So and another thing was the idea of customs. I'm looking at my notes again, that we see two different parts of Pakistan. We see the northern areas, and then we see the city. So the mountains and the plains, and the fact that it's so different in terms of the customs and the culture, because a lot of people who read about Pakistan basically think that it's a land full of terrorists, and our local writers are not helping that idea. They just like to perpetuate the fact that every book is set around some sort of an incident. So I feel like this also explores the diversity of our country, because when they're talking about the mountains and the scenery and the imagery that you get, I thought that was like a very good way of just looking at different parts of the country. We thought that we would mention things that we liked or disliked about the book. So I'll let you talk about some of the things that you liked.
Okay, so I liked how we had such a wide cast of characters, because the two main characters are Qasim and Satoon, but I wouldn't say there's any one particular main character. It's like a lot of them. And I liked how they took focus in the narrative as we moved through, and that reminded me of some older books that I've read, because it's more about the whole picture rather than the experience of one person, but we get to dive into one person at a time as we move through. I have my pencil to keep myself on track. But we get into the mindset of different characters as we move through the book, and they each have something to say about the broader narrative through their lens. And the characters come and go, and I liked how they transitioned throughout the book. I also really liked her writing. It was very readable, even when the plot got dark and really difficult. The writing still pulled me along, and she has like some just gorgeous lines and descriptions in there, and the tension that she built. We talked about that, how like the last few chapters we just raced through because the tension was just so high, and she built that really well. And I also just liked how the whole experience helped me learn about something that I wasn't really familiar with before, the partition and different cultures within Pakistan, because a lot of times, it seems like each culture is portrayed as like a monolith, like there's only one kind of person that comes from each country, and that's completely untrue. So that's very personal what I liked about the book, because I have gaps in my education, and it helped fill some of the gaps in my education.
Yeah, that's what I think. That I agree with everything that you said. That I think her books are entertaining. A lot of them are funnier than this. This one was one of the darker ones, but they're also like they entertain and they educate at the same time. Because she really talks from the politics of it from a very, very personal point of view, because she's lived through it. So she was born pre-partition, and everything that she writes about is basically, you can tell that, she's lived through it. I agree with you about the fact that the characters were really, really well crafted. I think some of them like really came alive on the page. Even the ones who left the stage at some point. We were introduced to two other characters at the refugee camp, but even the side characters and everything, and the way that they interacted and behaved, I think they really came alive on the page. One thing that I picked up from this book, because I've read her other work, is that this book does not have any Parsi characters. So Parsi basically means Zoroastrian, and Bapsi Sidhwa that's her religion, that's her faith, that's what she practices. And in the rest of her books, all of her characters are Parsi. So they felt very authentic at some point, because then you're like, oh, she's talking about her own people. That's why it sounds authentic. But even when she's making her main characters from the religion of Islam, or she's making them Muslims, like she's still doing a really, really good job of portraying that. Because that was one concern that I had before going into the book, that I was like, okay, she's Parsi, she can write that part of the culture really well, but can she do this? And I think I was proven wrong in the fact that why did I have this concern, because she portrayed it really well. That's one thing that I really, really liked about the book. So about the dislikes, what did you not like about the book?
I would say that it was a little uneven in parts. With the pacing of the narrative, because at the beginning we had a lot of quick scenes, a lot of like time jumps, and it went very quickly. And then we had like some longer scenes that I wasn't sure why they were longer. I think you can read into that and think like, oh, she made a longer scene, that must mean that that scene is important, but I wasn't sure if that was always the case. And then I think the characters disappearing from the narrative might have bothered me if I was reading it just for plot, because I'd been like, where did they go? So I think if somebody approached the book in that way, they might be bothered by that. But because I was like reading it for just like the broader picture, that didn't bother me as much. But overall, I'd say it was just a little bit uneven, but this was like the first book that she wrote. So it was easily forgiven. Like it didn't bother me that much.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like most of her books are very smooth in terms of like the pacing and everything. This one had a lot of, at some points, especially in the beginning, a lot of random things going on. And then like, because you're in the earlier chapters, you're not really sure if this randomness of this character or this page or this specific event will play a role later on. But I think some of it, parts in the narrative that I didn't really agree with, were the fact that it read a little inconsistent. And I think that was a very, very small portion of the book. Like most of the book was very, very readable. For me, the strength was in the second half of the book. Because after they make the journey from the plains to the mountains, I think that's where the book like really held my attention, and I was sort of really, really addicted to it, in the sense that it was better in terms of writing. I usually mark my fiction books a lot. This one had a lot of, you can't see it in this light, a lot of things, the way that she described things. So I really like that. So I think the writing did meander in the earlier parts. And it's probably because this is her first book. Like it was published later, but this is the one that she wrote first. What would you say to someone if they wanted to read this book as someone in America? Would you recommend it?
Oh, for sure. And I think, especially because in the States, there's not a lot of emphasis on authors from other cultures and other countries. You know, we're really preoccupied with our own stuff all the time. And definitely the partition is something that's not really taught in typical American schools. Like we usually will go over a little bit of like British colonialism and all the problems that that caused. But we don't really go into depth we don't go into depth about it at all. So I think this would be a helpful way for American readers to start to learn about that history and like the topics that we haven't been fed already. You know, we have to go and finish our own education on ourselves, for ourselves. And I also think that it's just a good narrative on its own too. Like even without like a learning opportunity, I think it's also just an enjoyable read. Like I said earlier, I really like her writing style, and yeah. I would tell people like it is a little uneven in spots, but like, you know, no book is perfect, and you, like as long as you're okay with the pace changing a little bit, then you know that's fine.
Yeah, I think I stalked you a little bit on Goodreads before this, and I saw your review. So we both gave this book 4 stars because for me it wasn't the perfect book, but I think it definitely had a lot going for it. And that basically means that we really enjoyed it, and I would recommend, of course. But I would also give you a little bit if you're sensitive, because there are some things that happen in this book. So if you're sensitive to the topic of, let's say, forced marriages, or generally just very women not being treated the way they're supposed to be. Let's just say that. Like, I don't want to give too much of it away, but if you're like sensitive to that kind of things, just know that before going in, because I wasn't particularly, nothing impacted me. I wasn't triggered in any way. I hate using that word, but I think there might be some people who are a little sensitive to very heavy topics like this, because we do start off with the partition. And if you study the partition, then you know that it was a very, very violent process. So there's that in there as well. So just a few, kind of warnings that you should know that this is a serious book.
I'll just add to that really quickly that the copy that I had a introduction at the beginning that I read that gave away some parts of it. So then I was definitely prepped for like those content warnings. So I was prepped for how serious and how dark it was going to get. So I appreciate content warnings like that. So like I read the intro, so I'm like, okay, I know what I'm getting into here.
If you like reading the intro, if you like to be aware, then I think the copy that you get, just read the introduction, because I think you probably had the Milkweed introduction publisher, which is the one that's commonly available in the US. So that's the one that probably has that introduction. So I think we're going to end it here. Thank you so much, Pao, for coming onto my channel, and I'll be on yours. But like, thank you for joining me in this conversation, because I just thought it would be fun to get a different perspective, because I can discuss this with anyone in Pakistan and they'll think exactly the same way that I do. But I think reading this with people who are not from here, you and Joe included, I think that adds to the element of this. So I will have Pao's channel and her Instagram account linked for those of you who are not following her, because you should. I don't know why you're not. We're not very consistent in terms of uploading, but we try. I think we're both somewhat similar to the patterns. Our uploading patterns are somewhat similar.
Thank you so much for inviting me in this buddy read and taking the time to explain all the things that I didn't know. Like that was really, really helpful and really nice of you to take all that time. Saved me a lot of Googling.
Yeah, I think I like to show off how much I know. And then when someone else challenges me, I'm like, oh, actually, I don't know that much. But it gives me an opportunity to sort of re-study or like just live through the history again, because the way that we are taught these things is not fun. We're taught about all the conferences and the political movements. Nobody tells us about the human impact of the partition in this much detail. So yeah, I think this was fun. If you guys want us to do another one, I don't know if this is a good video, but like I'll invite Pao back on my channel, so please leave it in the comments below and tell her to come back. You might get some interesting insights, otherwise it's just me.
Or not. I'm just a stupid American, so.
We live for that.
Maybe not.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys soon. Bye.